gentlemen, and everyone, happy leather fucking holidays. Yes. My favorite time of year. Do we have any first timers here? Yeah? Anyone from out of town? Excellent. Welcome. welcome. My name is Al Robb, and I am the chairman of Leatherman's discussion group. Welcome. Please turn off your cell phones and your pagers. If you need to have a conversation, if you can take it out to the front, that'd be great, because we are broadcasting. Bathrooms are up front. There's no emergency exit, so make your way to the front. And yeah, that's about all I have. The program runs from about now until about 9:30 with a 10-minute break around 8:30. I am going to turn it over to Eric Will, who is going to introduce our special guest.
Right on. Thanks, Al.
Thank you.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. Trying to keep the mic low enough that it's not going to do any feedback. So thank you all very much for coming out on this incredibly unpleasant, hot, ridiculous San Francisco heat wave night. It's great to see you all here, and it's really exciting to have with us tonight Charles, aka Cal Ryder, who is here.
It's good to see everybody. Do you know what I find impressive about this? So San Francisco is known for being cold, and yet this is one of the hottest days of the year so far. We've got to be close to what, almost 100 degrees today.
Darn close to
and
it.
yet this room is still filled with people in gear. This is awesome.
Yeah.
So good job, everybody.
Did you guys know Ed Ergot? He moved down to Los Angeles. He actually came here from I think from Phoenix, and all of his leathers were perforated, so he was able to keep cool. Yeah, that'd be good.
My husband and I, well, we live in Sacramento, which I call us bridge and tunnelers. I say that we're a suburb of San Francisco. We're just on the other side of Oakland. Just go with it. But we have a lot of perforated leathers in our collection, just because, you know, in January it's still 100 degrees there. So what do you do?
That's not true. That's false news.
It's 95.
Okay, that's better. Cool. So Cal is here tonight. Obviously, I think probably a lot of you know him from his movement Gear 365, which we're going to be talking about tonight. But as we like to do here at Leatherman's Discussion Group, we'll talk a little bit more about who Cal is, how he got here, what his story is. You are in Sacramento by way of Minnesota.
Absolutely. You know what's neat about this? My first time ever in California was in 2010, and that happened by way of a recon conversation. There was this really awesome guy that I had a chance to get to know on recon, and he's a school teacher, and said, you know what, if you've never been to California before, I'm off all summer, come out and visit. And we'd gotten to know each other a little bit. So he picked me up at the airport, literally, like it was an awesome come on. And we did what any self-respecting gay man would do. We left LAX, and the first thing we went out and saw was the Golden Girls house over there in Brentwood. So, but no, I fell in love with California and just everything that was out here, and I really set a goal after my husband and I had just barely met one another that I wanted to live here. And a couple years later, here we are. So it's amazing.
Excellent. So a lot of you may not know this. Cal, a simple farm boy from Minnesota, was actually the basis for the movie Drop Dead Gorgeous. Yeah, true story.
Has anybody actually seen Drop Dead Gorgeous? It is. So the thing about
this is like the home of all leather titles. It's required reading.
So they make fun of this place called Mount Rose, Minnesota, but it's based off of a real life city called Rosemont. And most of my family is from there. It's just south of St. Paul. And I've got at least 150 cousins. Like, I've made a rule, like, I never date in Dakota County. Like, there's going to be a lot of inbreeding there. But yeah, it's a real place. People lose their arts and threshers all the time. But it is a real place.
Yeah. And so up in Sacramento, tell us a little bit about what you do during your day job, because I think it's really interesting. You do things that not a lot of other people do.
I am very fortunate to have the ability to go to work every day and do something that I love. I work in television, I work in creative services at a television station up there. So what that is, so if you're watching, say, a news station here, we do all the promotion for that television station. So I'm in charge of the art and the graphics and making sure everything that we do is pristine and polished as it possibly can be. So for me, to be in California and doing this editorial work and doing graphic design, I feel like I kind of made it, you know. And Sacramento, it's not that far from San Francisco. We're really in the hub of everything. We're so close to Tahoe and the city, and it's just, we feel like we've created a beautiful life for ourselves here. This state, you really can do anything.
You can.
But that's what I go to work, and we'll get into more the gear fetish side of it in a little bit, but it is absolutely no secret in my job that I am into leather, and that's a big part of who I am. And we can touch on that in a little bit, but that's another huge win for what it is that I do.
Yeah. Gave away a huge secret. He's into gear. He's into leather.
Just a little
We're
bit.
going to do that later, but all right.
Just a little bit.
Also a motorcycle rider. I think that's the cow rider. So we love that. Also a breath play pig.
There's a few interesting stories with that, but yeah.
Okay, we'll get into that. And of course, being from Minnesota, you love the coffee and bars.
Oh, no. Well, no, see, one of the questions that I made him swear is that I would not divulge my mother's apple pie recipe. I cannot give anything else. We can talk about.
We're going to get it out of you by hook or by crook. Okay.
No, because I did move here from Minnesota, and we'll talk about small town Minnesota in a little bit, but I always say that I'm from a city called Coon Rapids, Minnesota, and it's just north of Minneapolis, St. Paul.
That was in your bio. I thought you were kidding.
It's a real place. What I always say about Coon Rapids, if you've never heard of it, is more children fall down wells per capita in Coon Rapids, Minnesota than any other city in the world. I think I spent my entire 6th grade down that well. You know, they finally found me. But
Keeping Lassie and biscuits.
oh no, Timmy. You know, she can't just save Timmy. So.
No, there's far more than Timmy. Well, let's talk a little bit more about growing up in a small town in Minnesota. And now here.
You know, I don't know if anybody else in this room, I'd like to think so. I had this wonderful, I call it a blessing now. It was really confusing when I was growing up, but I had this wonderful blessing where at a very young age, I had an affinity towards leather. It was something long before I really knew what sexuality was or sexual attraction was. I was drawn to leather, and some of my earliest memories all involve leather. But growing up in a small town, like there wasn't any internet, there was nobody else to talk to, there was no one around. All throughout my adolescence, I felt like there was something wrong with me, there was something taboo about that. Now as an adult and being out, that taboo aspect is kind of a turn on. But back then it was really confusing and very isolating. And so,
What were some examples of the leather that you found yourself attracted to as a apparently internetless child? I'm so sorry for you.
you know, growing up in the early 80s, you know, we were just lucky to have a television that was color. No, that's the interesting thing about it. My first memory with leather, I want to put myself maybe about 4 years old. My dad had this brown, like 70s looking pea coat. It's nothing that I would ever consider sexual by any means, but I remember it was just laying on the bed one afternoon, and I just, for whatever reason, went up to it, and I started feeling it, and just the way, it was a very tactile thing, you know? And I remember just sneaking into that hall closet. God, I was 4 or 5 years old, but there was such, almost like an erotic thrill of getting out of bed in the middle of the night and sneaking into that closet and grabbing that jacket and taking it back to the room. And I have no idea why I did it. But that was just something that was such a huge part of those fundamental development years. Yeah. And I've never been able to explain it, but it was always there. And yeah.
Did your parents explain it? I mean, did they think about it? You say you would grab this jacket and take it back to bed with you?
They never knew.
They never knew.
They never knew. So I would always, this was something I would do late at night when they never expected me to be out of my room or in bed or anything. I would grab that jacket and I would take it. There was one time I had taken it to my room. God, I had to be 7, 8 years old. And I wrapped myself up in it and had fallen asleep. And I guess they came in at some point to check, and they just couldn't really figure that one out. But kids do strange things. So. But it just had always been there.
Okay.
And I've never really figured out what spurred that attraction. But it was always there.
Were there other pieces of leather or visual cues or smells that kind of came on you as you
MTV in the 80s was amazing. And every rock star that ever lived wore tight leather, you know, no matter what gender they were. It was a feast for the eyes, you know. And so MTV, VH1, all of those, and gloves too really became a huge. And again, long before I really knew or understood what sex was, you know, at this point, I thought people got pregnant by eating a jar of baby food. I had no idea what sex was, you know, but it just was always such an attraction for me.
Where were you seeing the gloves? Like, was it on other people? Was it?
My dad had, and they were nothing like fetishy like this by any means. My dad had this pair of snowmobile gloves. They were gray, and I just remember they were in his nightstand. And all kids go through their parents' dresser. Who doesn't? Of course we do. This is why I don't have kids. They were in there, and the moment I put them on for the first time, I can still vividly remember that, and I would do all sorts of things. I remember just like smelling them and putting them over my mouth and my nose, and it was a comfort thing. It was a security blanket thing. And later on, you know, as soon as you hit 12 years old and your hormones are practically going snap, crackle, and pop, it became a very erotic thing. But in the beginning, it just felt good, you know.
Yeah. So what was that transition like for you as you started to hit puberty in small town Minnesota, smelling dad's gloves?
You know,
just saying that.
well, here's where this was a tough age, and I know so many people out here have been through a similar experience when I was 12 years old and started to discover what sexuality was and masturbation and all these things. I was going to Catholic school, and in Catholic school they ingrained in us God created Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, and there were a lot of discussions about homosexuality being an abomination. And so I would have these attractions. I would see, oh God, JCPenney catalog, you know, and shirtless men or guys, and things I would find ridiculous now. But when you're 12 years old and that's your only, I see heads nodding back there. But like they were such a huge turn on. And then there would be all this immense guilt. Like I just did this over a picture of a man. So it turned then to the lingerie ads, and I would do everything I could. I would steal my dad's Playboy magazines. I would do everything I could to try to unwire that. And just this immense amount of guilt, because there was something inherently wrong with me. And I knew if I didn't fix this, you know, it'd be eternal hellfire of damnation.
Yeah. Yeah. Quick shout out, fuck you, St. James Elementary for myself.
If I were to take these gloves off right now, my knuckles are still red from all the times they got smacked with that ruler. So this is more of a Band-Aid than anything else.
Just holding them together. So I guess when did you start to realize that this wasn't going anywhere?
I want to say I put on a lot of weight and got into a very deep depression through my teenage years. It was very isolating, and I was one of those kids that I was so shy and I was so afraid of my secrets really being found out, that I isolated myself from a lot of people. And I think it was, oh God, shortly after Matthew Shepard was killed, and just a lot of things were going on in the world at the time. Will and Grace had just come on the air, and it felt like we were entering a time where it was becoming okay to be yourself. I just started to realize, like, these are things that I can't change, and maybe I shouldn't be trying to change. But I had a girlfriend all throughout high school, and I was saving myself for marriage when in reality I was stealing a line from Clueless. I was saving myself for Luke Perry. But no, it was hard. But eventually, just I think by the time I was 19 years old, it was a battle. The battle of hiding my sexuality, being a gay man, it was just becoming too much to handle. And the coming out process was painful, but it was something that needed to happen.
Yeah. So yeah, how did your parents take that?
My first crush was this guy I went to high school with. He was gorgeous. No more gorgeous than you, sweetheart. No, he was beautiful, and he went to basic training in the Army right out of high school, and we'd write each other letters and things, and it was just, it was so hard being away from him, and it was this secret crush, this secret love that nobody knew about. And my parents couldn't figure out why I was so morose and why I'd be so excited to get a letter in the mail, or I'd spend an entire Saturday waiting by the phone in the off chance he had a chance to call from Fort Knox, Kentucky. And there was this day in October 1999, my car had broken down on the freeway and it was in the pouring rain, and just everything in life was wrong. And right there in hysterics, I broke down and I told one of my oldest and dearest friends what had been going on. And she's just like, why in the fuck haven't you told me this before, you know? And she had given me a book. I still have it to this day. It's called The Gay and Lesbian Self-Esteem Book. And I was reading it, and I was trying to just become more comfortable with my authentic self. And I had fallen asleep reading it one night, left my lamp on, and my dad had come in the room, and he had come to turn the lamp off, saw the book, and he lost his shit. And immediately threw me out of the house. And once my dad knew, everybody knew. He burst me out of the closet for me. And what was amazing, I have a very conservative family, Midwestern family. I love them to pieces, but they really surprised me. I thought for sure the whole family was about ready to let go of me, and it was amazing how they rallied around and really, in essence, emotionally kicked the hell out of my dad. Like, what are you doing? This is your flesh and blood. How could you be doing this to him? And my dad is a former Navy guy. He's got such an amazing heart, and he can tell a joke to save his soul, but he doesn't cry. I've never seen my dad cry until a couple of days later. I'd taken Harbor at my sister's house. He showed up, and he said, we'll work on this, we'll figure it out. Just please come home. And we did what any good Minnesota family did. We had a bonfire in the backyard. And we were sitting there, honest to God, having our Ham's beer. And I wish I was making this up. And he told me he was in the service in the 50s, and he would constantly have to get from like Norfolk, Virginia up to New York and things, and he would hitchhike along the way. And he was propositioned a number of times, and he had seen things on the side of the road that he was afraid that was going to be my future. And my dad, well, being in this room, it has been my future. I've done a lot of fun things in this room. Sorry, Dad. But the thing is that you can be a homosexual, you can be a transgender person, you can be a non-binary person, you can be whoever it is you want to be, but you can do so and go out into the world and be a healthy, well-adjusted, loving, caring, the same person you always were, but now you have the freedom to be your true self. And I think the first time my dad ever came over to my apartment with a same-sex partner and saw, it was just a normal house. Now, sure, the slings and the leathers and everything were there, but he couldn't find that, you know. It wasn't Easter Sunday, for crying out loud. But he really, and long story short, the same man that really struggled with this hosted our wedding in that same backyard where we had that fire pit, and has taken Scott on like he's his own son. And it's just, it's amazing how things can come full circle.
Yeah. Nice. I'm not sure what the right direction is or sort of order is to ask these questions, but I guess I'd love to know a little bit more about both how you met Scott and how your kink developed. Like,
You know,
when we last left you, you were in the closet with a jacket, literally.
well, here's the interesting thing about it. I don't know where the hell the bondage and breath control aspect of that came from. It wasn't there quite as early as leather was, but by the time I was kind of finding my sexuality, that same erotic thrill I would have going into the closet and grabbing my father's jacket, I would get that same erotic thrill by going down into the basement when nobody was home, and I loved, experimenting with rope and with duct tape and with saran wrap and doing all these things. And as a 13-year-old who didn't know what the hell he was doing, I'm honest to God lucky to be alive. But it just was always there. There was just this intense eroticism with it. So not only was the leather present, but now there was all this bondage, and it was getting off to the fantasy of another man doing this to me or me doing this to another man. At like 14 years old, you think, you have no idea what to think. There was no outlet to find out that, my God, there's millions of people out in the world that are exactly like me. You don't have to feel like something's wrong with you.
Yeah.
But it just had always been there. So my first same-sex relationship, we were together for 9 years, and he was a wonderful man. But I entered into it with my leather passion very deeply hidden inside of me. I was not comfortable letting anybody know that had existed. And as we progressed through our relationship, these needs were becoming more prevalent. I was so attracted to people in leather, in rubber, wanting to experience bondage and do these things. We tried to open up our relationship so that I could do these things. And for a while, that worked. And we always maintained we were going to be perfectly open with each other, because there are so many. Open relationships are a wonderful thing. You get to experiment and do all these things. But in our instance, we just found later on we weren't with the right people anymore. We wanted such different things. And my kinks and my fetishes, I wanted to be more of a full-time aspect in my life. And he just wasn't interested in that. So we amicably separated. And does anybody in here remember a website called gearfetish.com? It was around just about everybody. So I was on Gear Fetish shortly after I had broken up from my ex, and I swear to God, you're not a rebound. We've been together for 10 years. There was this really beautiful guy, and I can still remember the first photos of him I saw. He was in this Langlet's leather jacket. It's a leather company out of Portland. And just beautiful, dark eyes. And so we started chatting with each other on September 1st, 2009. And we chatted back and forth for over a year. And we finally had the courage to meet up with one another. He lived in Calgary, Alberta. I lived in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So the halfway point was Saskatchewan, middle of nowhere. So you rode your motorcycle. I packed my Toyota Corolla full of kink gear, bondage gear, leather gear, handcuffs, all these things. And I'm used to being a Minnesotan. My parents would go fishing in Canada all the time. I knew you needed a passport to cross the border, but I really didn't think it was going to be that big of a deal. So I passed through the border through a town called Portal, North Dakota. There's nothing there. You've never heard of it. I just figured this would be an hour. I'll be there in an hour. They pulled me over. They proceeded to go through my suitcase and find the leather hoods and the restraints and all these things. I'm pretty sure at this point immigration's about ready to think I'm a serial killer. And the worst part of it is they gave me this full interview. I was interviewed by 3 different people. I had to give a full account of who I was going up there to meet and what we were going to do. I didn't even know your last name, for crying out loud. That's terrible. So they're asking me all these sites, like, what website did you meet? And I'm just like making up any bullshit I can as fast as I can. Oh, it was a motorcycle forum. What was the website? Motorcycle blah, blah, blah. So whatever I could, but 45 minutes in that interrogation process, and I could see there was this woman who put on these latex gloves, and she's like digging through and pulling out my suitcase, and like I'm going up there to meet somebody on an intimate basis and do adult things, and they let me go. But yeah, so I almost got detained there in Portal, North Dakota immigration. So, oh well, it's a story for the grandkids someday.
That's a good one. So how did Saskatchewan?
Saskatchewan.
How did that turn out for you?
Oh, it was amazing. It was amazing. You and I were walking around this small town called Estevan for like 3 days in full leather, and I think there was more eyes that were about to roll out of people's heads. But it was awesome. It was just awesome. We came out of our room a few times.
We got the trip back from Regina to Estevan too. Remember how cold it was at nighttime, and we just hugged each other to keep warm because we doubled up on the bike.
Yeah, that's right.
Awesome.
So he rode his motorcycle there, so he completely swept me off my feet by being on the back of that motorcycle, and it was love at first sight. And yeah, I just this beautiful man in full leather on a motorcycle. It was just about every single fantasy I'd ever had. But we were so nervous when we met each other. I was trying to be all like manly and, you know, hey, what's up, guy? How are you? The first thing we did when we met, we fist bumped.
That's
That
adorable. Was that your first time on a motorcycle?
No. I learned to ride a long time
Okay.
ago. I just didn't have a motorcycle at the time, so.
Gotcha. So you didn't pop your two-wheel cherry. Quite.
He popped some cherries that weekend, but it wasn't the motorcycle. So I love how beat Reddy's turning over here too.
But it's a good thing you're in the chat. So how did your relationship develop? I mean, you lived in 2 different countries.
We maintained a long distance relationship for a very long time, and so at the same time I was getting to know him, I was also falling in love with California and working very actively to move here. And we stayed in contact throughout all of this, throughout my transition to Sacramento, leaving my life behind in Minneapolis. I wanted to be like Rhoda Morgenstern. I figured I'd keep better, you know. But I moved to Sacramento, but we could not find a way of being together because in 2012, DOMA and Prop 8 were still very much a thing. So he was trying to find a way to move here by way of being sponsored by a corporation. But all the paths to getting here,
It's a long shot.
damn near impossible. And with my career, and I was really doing such gangbuster work where I was in Sacramento, it was way too early for me to leave this new job and go to Canada. So we fought very hard. We did a lot of campaigning to get Prop 8 and DOMA to fall, a lot of protests and rallies and immigration rallies in Sacramento. And the story turned out very positively for us and so many people around the country. So we immediately got married in my parents' backyard. And we met so many other same-sex couples who were going through the immigration battle in 2013. And a lot of their cases were open and shut. And some of these people, they had very powerful stories where they had fallen in love with somebody who was here undocumented. And when they got married and were able to make that legal, their cases were finalized within months. So at the time we had gotten married, we had a decision to make whether or not Scott was going to stay with me in California or remain in Canada. It's not advisable to try to cross the border when you're going through an immigration case. His grandmother was passing away, and he had a very sick cousin, and he had a job and a house and all these responsibilities. He was the executor to his grandmother's estate. So we decided, why don't you stay in Canada? It makes sense right now. Our case ran into so many complications. It was 2 years. 2 years, and we had lawyered up. We had one of the best attorneys in Manhattan handling our case. But we ran into so many roadblocks, and anybody that was friends with us on Facebook they couldn't believe all the issues we were having with our case, but after 23 months came the moment where once again he was in that Langlet's jacket, and there I was holding a welcome home Scott sign, and he came down that escalator at Sacramento Airport, and he came home to stay, and it's been 4 years already, and you haven't divorced me yet. But yeah, it was very hard 2 years for us. We couldn't see each other very much.
Yeah, you can come up, but I couldn't go down. So
It was very tough. So, but we survived. I mean, it was a testament to our relationship, truly. But we made it.
Nice. So you're a full time. All
Yeah.
good.
all good.
Yeah, he's got his permanent residence now, and we're working really hard to get him to vote in the 2020 election. So, you got this.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. So how has I'm guessing your kink has probably grown together a little bit over those
Quite a bit.
9-ish years and the 4-ish years that you've been here?
Quite a bit. I think it's interesting because I talk an awful lot about coming out as a gay man. But a lot of us in this room, if you have kinks, if you have fetishes, there's a second coming out process where you have to accept that this is also a part of who you are. And as I had approached 30, I'd met you, I was starting to just accept, like, this is what I want. This is who I am. And you and I were still very shy about our kinks. But we were able to explore them together in the privacy of our home. And through my time here in California, it's amazing what this state will do for you when you arrive here and you see this amazing community here in San Francisco. And going to my first play party, I walked in this room maybe 5 years ago with a sir, somebody that I had become very close with. I was so incredibly nervous coming in this room. I had no idea what to expect. But just the experience of being in this room and seeing respectful play happening in all kinds of amazing scenes, a diverse amount of scenes occurred in a safe environment. It was right here on this wall that same night I was flogged for the very first time. I was terrified. But at the end of the experience, it was this intense amount of euphoria. I can't explain it. With breath control, it's very similar. Where you build up such a level of endorphins and finally your body just can't take anymore, and it's just this huge gush. And that remains one of my best kink memories and was right over here. And then at Gira, the same thing. And California has allowed me to safely have conversations with a number of people in this room and freely talk about the fact not only is it perfectly okay to be into kink, to be into gear, but what an amazing connection you can forge with so many unique people, not only in this city, but around the world. How many of you just came back from Folsom, Europe, and traveled the world because of your kink relationships? You were in Canada and you could see me kind of rising and doing these things, and I think that might have been hard for you for a while. And until you got here and came to your first play party, and you really have opened up a lot yourself. Somebody had made the comment tonight in some of our early YouTube videos, just Scott was very shy in the videos, but how much you've really changed in your time in California and how much more expressive you've become. And it is a beautiful thing when you finally allow yourself to be who you are and what you desire. It's freeing beyond words.
How did you find more community? You talked about finding Gear Up, so obviously you're online. So what did what did the internet do for your kink?
Well, finally, when the internet was a thing, it assured me that at least I wasn't alone, for one. And two, it really showed me what else is out there and how to do something safely, too. But it was one of those things, and I'm sure so many of us have felt this way once you tasted the forbidden fruit. You want more and more and more. It's this incredibly euphoric feeling. Arriving in California, I didn't know anybody here. I was very new. But through the power of Recon and various kink apps and kink websites, I was able to meet people very early on who kind of took me under their wing very safely. One of my first connections in this town was that sir I was talking about, and he became a chosen family to me, a brother, really. Introduced me to you and a number of people in this room. I felt safe just because of this community, and because I felt safe, I could explore flogging or all these other kinks for the first time. And I feel like once we have that safety, that reassurance, it unlocks you, you know?
Yeah.
So it's just amazing how much is transformed just being here.
Yeah. And so that, I think, probably leads us to Gear 365. How did that start?
It was, Gear 365 is such an amazing, in 2017, I was having a really tough year. My husband and I were finally together, which was wonderful. But some of my earliest relationships here in California were disintegrating through no fault of anybody's. It just, things happen and people go different ways. And I felt a serious void in my life because I no longer had a chosen kink family anymore. I wasn't wearing a collar anymore. I didn't have really close, trusted confidants with whom I could express my kink and my desires and share these things. And that put me into a depression. Very similar to how I felt when I was a teenager and I had to hide these things. When you don't have an outlet to express these sides of yourself, or somebody with whom you can feel close to discuss these things, you do kind of disconnect and you go numb. And that's what was going on. And as 2018 was coming around, I wanted to reincorporate my gear and my fetish into my life more regularly. And to do this, I had come up with a New Year's resolution. I wanted to wear some piece of gear every single day in 2018. And it, from something as simple as a wrist cuff to work, or a pair of gloves when I go to bed, something that reminds me of who I am, so I don't lose track of that when life gets heavy. So I talked about this idea with you. You thought it was pretty interesting. Originally I was going to call it like Leather 365, but I feel like it needed to be more than that. And so I shot this video at Christmas time 2017 where I put on various pieces of gear. And I posted this video on YouTube, on my YouTube page, just saying, this is a New Year's resolution that I want to do to help me feel better about myself. I'd love it if you would join me. Let's do a New Year's resolution to start a gear revolution and make gear a part of our lives. And the whole goal behind this was to feel proud of who we are and to feel connected with one another. And I didn't have a hell of a lot of YouTube subscribers, and I didn't think it would really go that far. But I posted that video on New Year's Eve 2017, and my God, within the first week of 2018, it had blown up. It was on we had hundreds of posts on Instagram using hashtag Gear365, and I didn't even create the Facebook group. Somebody else created the Gear365 Facebook group and made me an admin of it. And all of a sudden we had like hundreds of members, and this was the first couple weeks of January. And I said, shit, Scott, this is getting big and fast. But what I think spurred this was the things that I was looking for. I wanted an outlet where I could be kinky. I could be a gearhead. I wanted to feel like I could belong or make this a part of my everyday life. so many people around the world had a similar need. And they saw this, and I think that spoke to them. And that's really now 20 months into Gear 365. It's just snowballed into this huge movement across the globe. Solely because, again, everybody is looking for a place where they can belong and feel safe and be themselves. The same experience I found in this room the first time I came in here for a play party. I felt safe to be myself, and it was a whole different world once I did.
It sounds like you hit it at some sort of perfect, interesting inflection point for a lot of other people where they were like, yeah, me too.
Well, you know, and I don't want to turn the conversation political by any means, because there are a lot of different political views, not only in this room, but across anybody that's watching. But I think it is a fair assessment to say that we are living in a time where it's easy to be outcast because you're different. It's so easy, and this has been going on since the beginning of time, but more so than ever in my lifetime, I feel like there's a danger of stepping out of the traditional norms. And I think right now we need to come together and be different, to stand up for who we are as individuals and appreciate all the wonderful differences that make us who we are. The world needs this and has always needed this. And anything I think that promotes our individuality and our diversity, let's do it. Truly.
Yeah.
So.
I think that feels like a good place to take a pause. Everybody go hydrate, because my God. So yeah, let's take a break for like 15, 20 minutes. Chat, make some connections, share some phone numbers or emails or whatever. Come back in a bit.